Good morning, everyone. Bonjour. My name is Ross Siemens, and I have the honor of being the Mayor of the City of Abbotsford. It is my pleasure to be here with you today, and thank you for joining us in the relative warmth of City Hall compared to what we were experiencing on Sumas Prairie. I'd like to start by acknowledging that the City of Abbotsford is located on the traditional territories of the Semeth, Mathakwe, and Lekwamo First Peoples. On behalf of the City of Abbotsford and Abbotsford City Council, it's a pleasure to welcome you here to our great city, the cultural and economic hub of the beautiful Fraser Valley. Today, the Honourable Bill Blair, President of the King's Privy Council for Canada and Minister of Emergency Preparedness, will be making a funding announcement under the Disaster Financial Assistance Arrangement Fund to provide disaster recovery funding here in British Columbia. The Minister is joined by the Honourable Pam Alexis, BC Minister of Agriculture and Food, Talib Noor Mohammed, Member of Parliament for Vancouver Granville, myself, and Chief Dalton Silver from Semeth First Nation. To give you an idea of how today's event will unfold, we will hear brief remarks from Minister Blair, myself, and Chief Dalton Silver, followed by a question and answers. Now, without further ado, please join me in welcoming Chief Dalton Silver from Semeth First Nations.
Thank you, Mayor Siemens, and I want to say Lamhailtuch is my name. I'm Chief Dalton Silver, Semeth, and on behalf of Semeth, Mathakwe, and Lekwamo, I want to welcome everyone here today, and it's an honor to be included in this. I do believe we're at a time when we're looking at equality and government to government. I know the federal and provincial governments and Mayor Siemens and I have all talked about working together on into the future for the betterment of our peoples, and it's good to be here, and I just want to thank everybody, and it's good to be included, and welcome to you all.
Thank you, Chief Silver. We have been friends our families have been friends for many generations, so it's a pleasure to have you here. Next, I'd like to invite MP Talib Noor Mohammed to introduce Minister Blair.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you all today. Today's announcement is really about the importance of communities, Indigenous leadership, the federal and provincial governments working together. And as we have seen over the course of the last number of years, the climate crisis, the challenges that we're going to be seeing, that we have seen, that we continue to see in terms of what this means for infrastructure, for building resilient communities, is something that we take very, very seriously. And it is in that vein that I am so glad and so grateful that my friend, the Honourable Bill Blair, who has been at the forefront of making sure that this work gets done in a collaborative, meaningful way, has made his way to British Columbia and to right here at the heart of what was some of the most challenging, some of the most destructive force that we saw over the course of the last couple of years. And Minister Blair has been at the forefront of making sure that communities, Indigenous leadership, the province are in the conversations that we need to be having. And today's announcement is going to be, I think, an important recognition of the work that we need to do together and the investments that the federal government is going to be making in ensuring that work is done sustainably and for the long term. So with that, Minister Blair, over to you.
Thanks, Talib.
Good to see you.
Thank you very much, Talib, for that kind introduction. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for joining us here today. I actually wanted to begin with a bit of an acknowledgement. We were going to make this announcement out on the plane this morning in part of the infrastructure that was destroyed in the terrible floods of November 2021. But of course, we were also reminded that sometimes weather can impact our best laid plans. And I want to thank the members of the media who joined us here today for their accommodation and for putting up with the changes that we had to make. And I'm very grateful, by the way, to the Mayor for making this space at Abbotsford City Hall available to us today to make this important announcement. I'd like to begin, if I may, by acknowledging that we are making this announcement this morning in the City of Abbotsford, which is located on the traditional territories of the Samath, Musqueam, and Lekwemel Nations. And I also want to thank my good friend, Chief Dalton Silver, from the Samath Nation, for joining us here today. That relationship and those acknowledgements are an important part of all of our work. And we have benefited tremendously from our friendship and partnership and learning of the traditional knowledge and the history of this region of the world as we've done the important work together of helping people recover from the extraordinary events that this area has experienced. And as everyone here is well aware, in 2021 was in fact an unprecedented year for British Columbians, from fires and extreme heat waves to the devastating flood we've talked about over the course of a single year. The provinces was dried out, scorched, and then flooded. I've had the opportunity on many occasions to travel to British Columbia over the past year to meet with the mayors, First Nations leaders, and residents of the affected communities. And they have shared stories about the losses and hardships that they experienced, and they have stressed the need for greater partnership and coordination and the importance of building lasting resiliency as we recover from these events. And in Abbotsford, the city recorded the most rainfall it had ever received in a single month, reaching 1/3 of the city's typical annual rainfall. Floodwaters surged across the Sumas Prairie and surrounding areas, which caused massive damage to properties, homes, and city infrastructure. Where we were earlier this morning, out on road number 31, we saw the impact of this catastrophic flooding. And at its height, that area was completely submerged, causing extensive damage to property, infrastructure, and the livelihoods of the people that work and live there. Climate change is making these once-in-a-generation events, unfortunately, far more frequent. And we have seen an increase in both the frequency and the severity of these events. They are realities that we can't prevent, but we can be better prepared together. And when they do occur, I want to assure the people of British Columbia that your federal government is committed to supporting not only the immediate response, but the long-term recovery of this community. And that is why today, I am very pleased to have the opportunity to announce a federal payment of nearly $557 million, which will be given to the province of British Columbia through the Disaster Financial Assistance Arrangement, and that the province will then use to assist with recovery costs associated to the November 2021 floods. Now, this brings in total the federal payment so far to date of over the past year of over in excess of $1 billion, which has gone directly to the rebuilding across the province that is so important. But I also want to be very clear that the money we are announcing today and that we announced back in July is simply interim payments, because we know there's much work to be done. And we're very grateful for the collaboration, cooperation, and close partnership that exists not only between your federal and provincial governments, but between First Nations leadership and municipal and regional leadership across the country. We are all working together for the recovery and the greater resilience and strength and safety of all Canadians. The funding that we announced back in July is in addition to the $30 million that was raised through the Canadian Red Cross appeal. And during the worst of that storm in November of 2021, the province and the federal government came together and provided matching funds with our partners in the Canadian Red Cross. And that money was made available in excess of $100 million to help people with their immediate needs, to keep food on the table, a roof over their heads, to find interim housing, and to get through the worst of that disaster. But we know much more needs to be done. And I noted just quite recently, the province has assisted the community of Merritt, for example, in the opening of interim housing for people who have still been displaced from their homes. I was also up quite recently, yesterday, in Princeton, meeting with Mayor Coyne and talking about the impact that this event has had on their community and is still having on people who've been displaced from their homes. There's a great deal of work that's been done, but there remains much to be done still. And there are lessons that we are learning that can help us build back stronger. In the National Adaptation Strategy our government launched in November, we included significant new investments in the creation of better flood mapping and the creation of a flood risk portal so that every Canadian in every community can have the data and information that's going to help inform them and make sound decisions and better decisions about where they build and how they build to make sure that they can be safe for such events. The strategy also included a significant investment of $489 million to top up the Disaster Mitigation and Adaptation Fund, because we know it's important to invest in structural and natural infrastructure projects that will increase the resilience of communities impacted by natural disasters. We are investing in the recovery, but we also have to invest in stronger communities. British Columbians, and indeed all Canadians, must be assured that we will always be there for them. We'll work together, as we have done here in British Columbia, to better prepare and to build back stronger. I want to thank you all for joining us here today, and I want to acknowledge and offer my very sincere thanks to all of our partners for working with us and for your commitment and your dedication to serving the people of your communities. I think this is really what Canadians expect from all orders of government and from our national Indigenous leadership: come together, to work together for the betterment and the safety of all Canadians. I'm now very pleased to pass the mic over to my friend, Minister Alexis, our Minister of Agriculture here in British Columbia, and an important partner in our work here in the Abbotsford area. Mr. Alexis.
Good morning. I'm Pam Alexis, the Minister of Agriculture and Food. I'm also the MLA for Abbotsford Mission. And I'm honored to be with you today on the traditional territories of the Samath, the Matsqui, and Leq'emel First Peoples. It's a pleasure to have you again in our community, Minister Blair, and a pleasure to meet you for the first time. Talib, I'm going to try this. Nur Mohammed, did I say it right? Thank you. Of course, always a pleasure, Mayor Siemens, and also my friend from Leq'emel First Nations, Rick McCamey, and of course from Samath First Nations, the Chief Dalton. Always a pleasure to see you and hear your words. On behalf of my colleague, Bowen Ma, British Columbia's Minister of Emergency Management and Climate Readiness, I would like to thank the Honourable Bill Blair and the Public Safety Canada for inviting me to be part of today's announcement. I also want to express my gratitude to Minister Blair and the Government of Canada for your continuous support and collaboration as we continue our work to help people and communities recover from the recent disaster and protect them from future climate events. Everybody here in the Fraser Valley remembers November of 2021, when our province endured one of the most devastating weather events in recent history. Entire communities were flooded. Major provincial highways and bridges were washed away, and large swaths of precious BC farmland was destroyed. And I can tell you, just the experience I had, I was in a helicopter just days after the atmospheric river hit our communities, and the area was unrecognizable. I had difficulty getting my bearings when I was looking over it because it was just unimaginable, the kind of damage we saw to community. And I know we were in a location, or we were supposed to be in a location where you could see the impact and see the improvements since that time. But despite the worst of conditions that we experienced, it brought the very best out in people. And I can tell you, people both within the community and outside the community wrap their arms around those that were impacted so significantly, and they didn't just do it for a couple of days. They did it for as long as it took for people to feel safe again and were able to move on. So I just want to say that even though it was a terrible thing to experience, we really did see the best of humanity. We know that climate change will continue to accelerate, and our province will continue to face challenging and severe emergencies in the years ahead. And we know that river flooding is expected to be at least 10 to 20% more frequent, and that local floods from heavy downpours are expected to be 40% more frequent. And that's why it's clear that all of us, First Nations and local, provincial, and federal governments, must work together to make our people and communities more resilient to climate-related emergencies. And I'm just So happy that's exactly what's happening here in Abbotsford. I'm thankful for the federal government's latest atmospheric river-related disaster financial arrangement payment of $557 million. This payment helps offset provincial costs associated with responding to the events and rebuilding damaged infrastructure here in Abbotsford and the Fraser Valley and in other areas impacted in the province. Canada, BC, and First Nations Leadership Council are also working towards a trilateral agreement on emergency management. And this will strengthen the ability of First Nations to respond and recover from future climate-related disasters faster. And it's part of our work towards an Indigenous-led and culturally safe future in emergency management. We know, as Minister Blair says, we still have work ahead of us, and we continue to rebuild and recover, and I look forward to continuing our partnerships as we work to reduce the severity of future disasters and help people and communities recover and thrive. Thank you very, very much for being here today.
Thank you. We appreciate your words. It's great to be here today with these leaders in appreciation of their commitment to helping Canadians and the communities impacted by the atmospheric rivers and storms of November 2021. In Abbotsford, the agricultural capital of Canada, we experienced a devastating once-in-a-100-year flood event when the Nooksack River in the U.S. overtopped its banks and headed north, overtook the Sumas River, and breached a 100-meter section of Sumas Dike. This led to the evacuation of more than 3,000 people from 1,100 properties in Sumas Prairie, the closure of the Trans-Canada Highway, and the U.S.-Canada border. It also resulted in disruptions to the supply chain, gasoline restrictions, and the loss of more than 600,000 livestock and poultry, severely impacting the food production in the most productive agriculture community in Canada. These storms also led to landslides around our city, extensive damage of our roads and bridges, like the one that we were at earlier today, where you nearly froze. All told, in Abbotsford alone, there were more than 300 sites in serious need of repair, and city staff and crews have been working tirelessly on recovery efforts ever since. I am pleased to say that so far, in Abbotsford, around 200 of these damaged sites have been repaired, and thanks, in part, to the initial round of the disaster financial assistance arrangements we received from the Government of Canada through the Province of British Columbia and other forms of funding they provide. The site of the bridge there was washout that we were at earlier. There is a large dairy farm there that I have known, 3 generations of our family have known. And just to put in context to some of the challenges, they have chose to live in a trailer and took care of their barns and their livestock first and foremost. They are still rebuilding their house. So those are some of the impacts of some of our residents, and the resiliency and the care that they take for the farms and the livestock are first and foremost. They put themselves second. So that's significant, and we appreciate your assistance. While we have accomplished a lot so far, there is still important work that needs to be done to ensure that our families, farms, and businesses are safe, and our provincial food security, our provincial food system is secure, which is why I'm so pleased that the Government of Canada and Minister Blair are here today pledging even more financial support. As a city, we are grateful for all the DFAA funding we've received so far from the Government of Canada through the province of BC and the new support that the Government of Canada is providing today. And as we continue the recovery work, we will also continue to advocate for the needs of our community and will work with all levels of government, including our local Indigenous leadership. We appreciate your support, and we appreciate working with you. to find and implement solutions that will best protect all of the people in this area from a future flooding event. Once again, I would like to thank the Government of Canada, the Province of British Columbia, for their commitment to helping the residents of Abbotsford as we rebuild and recover and work towards long-term flood prevention and mitigation in our community. Now I believe it is time for questions, and I'm going to turn that over to Annie to manage that portion of this. Thank you.
These are on behalf of my colleague. What is the province doing in response to allegations of abuse and improper slaughter techniques linked to a BC slaughterhouse, that one being
Thank you for the question. It's troubling anytime we hear stories of animal abuse, and we did receive a letter and video yesterday, and I can assure you we're looking into the situation immediately. Thank you.
And a follow-up, will you hold or put hold on their license while they are under investigation?
I can't determine that at this point, but we will be releasing something shortly.
My question is for Mr. Blair.
Yes, sir.
Where is the money going? Where are these checks being cut to? And, you know, to think about emergency preparedness, that is a proactive term, like being prepared.
Yes, sir.
So this is a reactive thing. How are we supposed to be assured that this is going to make any difference now that we know that these things are going to increase in severity?
Yeah, thank you very much. It's an excellent question, and one that we're working on together. First of all, the province, all provinces have a responsibility to develop and implement their own disaster financial assistance arrangement in the aftermath of these events. We provide remuneration, and we cover about 90% of the costs, of eligible costs for that. So the decision as to what would be funded is based on that eligibility criteria agreed to between the province and the federal government. We provide the money to the province, as we've done today. And the province works very closely with regional and municipal governments and with impacted businesses and residents here in British Columbia. And there's a number of other significant expenses that were also incurred by the province of British Columbia for critical infrastructure. Bridges that were washed out, highways, culverts, some of the rail lines. And so that work has, you know, and I reflect a little bit on the extraordinary work that was done to reopen the Coquihalla in the immediate aftermath of these floods. And our initial assessment that it could have taken several months. And in fact, that work was completed adequate to open up that highway within 6 weeks. But that was an expensive response, and federal dollars are there to help. I think the question that you ask about, you know, that we can be better prepared for future events, given that they are increasing in severity and frequency, is the most important question. I'm very mindful that we're spending public dollars, and just simply rebuilding back to the state that we were in previously is a recipe for future costs. And we know that every dollar we invest in prevention can reduce the cost of recovery by as much as $10. And so this is also an investment in not only future resiliency, but in cost avoidance, significant cost avoidance. And so it's one of the reasons we're working with the province and working with First Nations leadership and traditional knowledge and our municipal and regional partners. We want to make sure that as we recover and provide funding for that recovery, that there's an investment in resiliency at the same time. And that requires us to reflect on things like building codes and where we build as well. And one of the things that we are working with the provinces and municipalities with is the development of what we call a flood risk portal, so that people can make informed decisions. For example, if they're on a floodplain, as to whether or not it's safe to rebuild there, or whether or not they need to build in a different way. And it also is in helping to inform some of the discussions we've been having with the province and with the municipality and First Nations about the investments that we'll make in infrastructure that protects these communities. And so there are important conversations taking place around diking systems, pumping stations, and how we can then protect our communities from the increase in these future events. And so one of the things we are absolutely committed to is not just simply going in and assisting in recovery. It's an important part of what we're responsible for, and we are going to help these communities and these people recover. but we also want to work with them and make sure that that recovery is done in an informed and thoughtful way to create greater resilience so that we can actually work on disaster risk reduction and to help keep people in their communities safer for the future. And so your question, I think, highlights important elements of the work that we are undertaking together.
So just as a follow-up, what is the timeline for getting this money out the door? Is it like $50 million every year for 10 years? Is it $100 million for 5?
To be quite honest with you, we estimated the initial damage initially at close to $5 billion. We knew that work wouldn't, there's not enough workers and an effort to make all of that happen at once. Much of that money's already gone out the door. The province has already expended those dollars and is now seeking and receiving reimbursement from us. Under normal circumstances, the disaster financial assistance arrangement usually requires that a province make application and then submit all the bills at the end, and there's an audit and an assessment and review to make sure that everything is eligible, and then we write a check. But in the very earliest hours of this event, we recognized that the scale of the work that needed to be done would far exceed even the province of British Columbia's ability to finance that recovery in totality. And so we worked very closely with them to develop what we call interim or advance payments. I was out here last fall and brought close to $870 million, which was flood recovery money, and in response to some wildfires. We're back again today with another significant advance payment, but I want to be very clear, there's more to be done. And we're going to continue to work with the province, and as that recovery takes place and as those investments and money has to be expended by the province and by communities, their federal government will be there to remunerate those payments and help them continue in that recovery. We know that those investments have to be done in a timely way. People can't wait years for that money. They need it right now. And we want to make sure the work proceeds in a timely way, and so we're working hard to make sure the money is available to them when they need it. Thanks.
What's the status on the backlog of applications for disaster relief funding? We know as of a few months ago, some applicants were still waiting to receive help, financial help. Will this money help clear that backlog and make sure that applicants to disaster relief?
And I don't want to speak on behalf of the province. I know that they have been working tirelessly in processing those applications. I've also gone to communities and I've gone to people whose homes have been damaged and who are waiting for not just funding for recovery, but they need information. They want to know if they can rebuild there. They want to know if it's safe to rebuild there. They also want to know that their community will be safe for them in the future. And that's work that we're doing with our regional and municipal governments as well as the province to get those answers for people as quickly as possible. There's a number of important initiatives underway, and I'd be happy to talk about those in some detail. But in direct response to your question, I know the province is working on that. The provinces identify to us, to my office, those expenses that they have reimbursed that they believe eligible for federal backstop, and then we move as quickly as possible to get those dollars out here. There's very close coordination between us. And one of the things that did happen that I think was very helpful and has really expedited our response is in the various early days of this disaster, the Prime Minister and then Premier Horgan formed a joint committee, which was made up, first of all, of provincial and federal ministers representing all of the different ministries that were impacted by this. And I think sometimes we think about a flooding event as primarily a public safety issue, but we learned almost immediately it was a significant agriculture issue. There was enormous impact on transportation in the country. For the Department of Fisheries and Oceans, for Natural Resources Canada, for Environment Canada, there were so many implicated ministries that the Premier and the Prime Minister thought we better bring everybody together. But we also recognized when we formed that table that we needed the voices of national Indigenous leadership. And so the invitation went out. And we've had many, many meetings. They've been part of that process. Everybody's working together to respond in the right way. But the task is monumental. And we've got, if we're going to spend these public dollars, we want to get it right. And so making sure it's informed by a careful analysis of those risks and ways in which we can reduce those risks is the important work that we're doing together.
And what about the flooding of the Nooksack River in Washington State? What's being done to prevent it on the U.S. side from then spilling over into BC?
Yes, ma'am. And I can tell you there's been important discussions already between the two federal governments of the United States and Canada. very important discussions taking place between the province of British Columbia and the state government of Washington. And there is also conversations, Chief Silver and I were chatting this morning about discussions he's been having with his family and colleagues on the other side of the Nooksack, at the Nooksack. And so there is important work going on. I'm meeting tomorrow with Minister Ma, who unfortunately wasn't able to be here today because she couldn't get away from the legislature, but we are talking about the establishment of more formalized structure and to make sure that at all orders of government, including national Indigenous leadership, that we're all at the table working together. We know if we're not able to solve the problem of the Nooksack, it's going to impact on our ability to protect this community, and so that's work that we're all committed to. And I also want to share with you, I have a great deal of confidence. We work very closely and collaboratively with our friends and allies in the United States, and you know, they recognize that together we've got work to do.